Ladies and gentlemen, very warm welcome to the third speech in the Linkwitz Parlor today. We have the pleasure to have one of the famous tape restorers, transducers, producers, musicians in our room. I tell you, last year we were having a room one floor up, and a guy came in, "Can you play this for me?" And I said, "Yes." I transfer it to my NAS drive and I'm going to play it. And I said, "Holy shit, this sounds so good. What is this?" I did it myself. And yeah, that was one of his files from the tape transfer. And then I think you liked it and kept coming back. And for this year we put in focus the people who are doing all this great stuff for us, bringing the music from the musicians to the medium that we are using for our pleasure in listening. And it's such a tremendous amount of work to make these things sound right. And I think on this floor, or even on this whole show, most of the people are just from the rendering side and showing you speakers and amplifiers and everything. And we really like to put some focus on the other side of the recording medium, where it all starts, so to speak. And really to honor those people and to thank these people. That's why we invited them to give insight in their work. And who better can do this for the tape transfer as Jamie Howarth.
Alrighty.
Yeah.
No, thanks guys. It's glad you're here. Let me introduce myself a little bit. My name is Jamie Howarth. I own a company called Plangent Processes. We developed a tape playback system that consists of a tape preamp. It's a custom head, custom preamp. We do a lot of work with the major labels, and our thing is digitizing from an analog source, almost invariably from the master. We developed a couple of interesting sidelines, and what I wanted to talk about today was that I have a really oddball, high technology thing that is predominantly digital, although, as I say, we designed an analog preamp that works really well. And there have been a tremendous amount of controversies that I'm sure anybody who's paying attention in the audiophile community about original intent, and is it measurements, or is it the sound, or what are you listening to, and what's really important. And I'm a musician from the time I was a kid. My first pro gig was singing on commercials when I was a 10-year-old. And I learned the tech kind of through the seat of the pants backwards, and I was able to hire some great guys and get close to some great guys over the years that worked in tape, and worked on master tapes, and worked on building tape machines. A good guy, this guy now, Dale Mankin at 3M. I mean, we were very close. When we started building this process, we went to the older guys and said, "What would you do if you could do it today?" Right? And so after a whole bunch of time of back and forth, I've learned a lot of things, I think, that are about the audio, but they're also about some of the ways that we shape our thinking with regard to what the experiences of being an audiophile or being a professional in the business. I come from pro audio, which, for better or worse, this is we live and die on what we put on tape for y'all to listen to. And I think there's been a dichotomy, a little bit of a dialectic between the way that pro audio guys approach things and audiophiles approach things. And I think that's converging. I'm really hoping to think that that's converging. So my purpose, is my aesthetic in this anyway, my intent, is to try to show how that crosses over, although this is a really kind of a technological thing. Let me show you right off the bat something that you're real familiar with. And listen to the stab of this electric guitar. You guys know this one backwards and forwards. the audiophile for Bedway. This is one of the records you're going to hear at the shows all the time. Now, what I'm going to talk to you about is that the machines always did some things. The transports were actually tremendous. The tape transports, pulling a piece of plastic through an obstacle course, through a miniature golf course, trying to get from one end to the other and have it be perfectly stable so that the speed didn't move. And well, you know, even this is an ATR, by the way. This is an ATR 102. This is a copy of an ATR 102 because I see it was mixed on an ATR and then there was a one-to-one that was made by somebody someplace in order to be able to get to this, right? And in the original, I'm going to play this again. It's just amazing how much motion and how beautiful this guitar is. Just take a listen to this part of it. Okay, so what was the original intent? It was this. It just sits there and drills. There's no speed variations in it at all. I'll show you what that looks like, and I'll go back and listen to it again so you get some kind of a sense of what it is that we're talking about here. And again, this is not just numbers, but this is the image of what the original tape machine actually was moving during the course of the mix of this record. This is the fade at the end. Okay, they tacked on the fade, so you can see there's an edit there. The machines always broadcast something ultrasonic. Bias, servo noise, they pick up the TV. A lot of times on live stuff we see the closed circuit TV will bleed in. Anything that was constant as an oscillator and was recorded on the tape is going to come back doing the mambo, the way that the tape changed it. We capitalized on that by saying, all right, I tell you what, that's got to be right. So if it's moving and we reverse that digitally, again, digital, horrible word. Well, you know, I don't know. Because what ends up happening is we can go back 2 generations, sometimes 3 generations, to the original console, which is what they were hearing. Which is why when it comes into a situation like the original intent, and you see that this is what you can actually, this is what the machine actually wanted to do, that's after we processed it. So basically what we do is we get the audio and this. Sorry, I'm fumbling here a little bit, but here we go. This is the original motion. That's the motion detection of the machine. And we can go back in here and correct it by doing an FM analysis of that and end up with something that actually the audio and this are doing, they're straight line, dead ass on. So without doping the conversation too much, let's check the beginning of those 2 pieces again so you get a sense of what it is I'm talking about. In the initial, there's some motion in the guitar, it moves, it's kind of nice, it's whatever. That's not what Phil Collins and Hugh Padgham did. That's not what they recorded. What they recorded was something that drills you in the forehead because he's pissed off at whoever it is that he's singing about. He's not going to do something that's nicey. He's going to hit you in the head. But the machine sort of subverted that. So again, original intent, what's the original intent? Well, knows electronics, and again we're getting into the objective field. That's the sum and difference product, blah, 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 blah. I am. Well, did anybody know that the transports actually did that? Yeah, Dale did. Dale's there with his stethoscope, and he's like, wait a minute, when I drop the putter down with that 3M iso loop, it sounds better. Why does it sound better? Because that goes away. Now, what does that do? Let's say it's an A440 flute. Well, follow me with a little bit of math here. Got a 440 flute, 60 cycle flutter. Well, you're not going to get just 440 back. You're going to get 380, 440 minus 60, and 500, 440 plus 60. That's what intermodulation distortion actually is. It's the sum and difference superimposed on top of the original signal. It's not harmonically related, and it's not just, by the way, on A440, it's on the whole fucking record, all right? So when something like this comes along, and, you know, proudly we were able to knock it down quite a bit, all right? And that's, again, it's not something that's auto-tune or anything else. It's a priori, is, to me, is a really important term to it. It's something that previously existed. This was on the tape. This was made by the machine. This was not something Jamie made up. This was not some digital process that auto-tuned it. This was what the damn thing did. And the result of that is that swarming of bees that you hear in the Ella Fitzgerald, right? The swarming, even in the Moonlight in Vermont, those are Ampex 300s. That's capital. There's radio records right down the road. You can't, but they had a lot of this. They had a welter of bearings and spindles and all this other mechanical shit that eventually got tamed down to the point where an ATR 102 is pretty good. You know what? In the air is an ATR 102. Hate to tell you. Okay? So it never was perfect. But one thing that Mike and I actually consulted on for a few minutes was, I don't know if I want to go into the provenance of this, but, okay, all right. This just came out recently.
We had your leaving, that's okay.
I agree with you on the EQ. Okay, so let's set that aside. But I'm not going to play the version that I touched up. I don't think that's fair. All right, but here's, again, watch the bell tree. Let me give you the bell tree.
We had your leaving, that's
I won't mention his name, but Bernie did a nice job on that. Okay, he was somewhat directed, which you and I talked about. I think that shape that's in the bottom end, that little bit of lump that's in there. Who knows? After 4 or 5 iterations back and forth, I think the guy said himself, you know, sometimes the first one was the best. But here's what that thing I showed you with a 60 hertz spike. That's this, and it's going to do something very different. If I can get my control back here. I give the doubles due. Here's the original again.
we had your
One of the best recordings ever made. That's Roger Nichols. I love the guy. I wish he was still around. He was really, really good to me as we were coming up. This is what Roger did.
we had your leaving, that's
Nice system, guy.
Yeah.
Nice
Yeah.
work,
Yeah.
Jamie.
Linkwitz, all right?
Hey, Jamie.
Doesn't
Sounds
sound like
good.
that at home.
Right.
Not for me.
Hey,
Now,
Jamie.
here's the thing is that, I'll tell you an inside secret inside this room, and Michael already knows this. The tech has been hard, working on this, getting it right, honoring the material, screaming at myself sometimes, throwing up one time when I pressed play on American Beauty, when I hit the space bar and sent it, and then went, oh, I don't know, blah. It's my tell, everybody's got one, don't, you know, all right, I've had it since swimming teams when I was a kid. I used to, before swimming meet, that was me. Other guys did other stupid shit, I went and threw up. So I've earned this, I feel like I, honest to God, I really mean it. The toughest thing has been that sometimes the mastering guys, they don't want to hear about it. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to know about it. You don't have a label. Doesn't want to know about it. And I don't know how to solve that, other than in a merit situation, a merit argument, show it, let you guys decide, whatever it is. But my point is always that the musicality, the subjective, this is digital. I hate to, I can't, there's no other way around it. Michael and I have had this conversation for 15 years. At least, right?
Paid for it.
I know. And by the way, it's converging, yes? Yeah. So there are things that can be done now, and this is one of them. I think, I'm very passionate about this, I get really worked up about it, but I think this is really, really good use of the material, not to auto-tune, not to do some fucking crazy thing, not to argue about 2 dB at 10K. Jim Keltner doesn't give a shit about a half a dB at 10K. He wonders whether or not it rocks. And he's like, Mississippi Queen, I put a Mississippi Queen, jumped out of his chair. I hadn't heard that before. So why does Hal Blaine swing harder in America on the in the process rather than the original? Why does he swing harder? Because it isn't moving around. It's digital. I don't care. Right. This does translate to vinyl fairly well. I've heard, and Michael and I talked about this also. Recently heard a American Beauty that Dave Blaster did a beautiful. I've done a lot of the Grateful Dead work and very proud of that. American Beauty was done by Steve Barnhart, fantastic recording. It should be in every room. I mean, Ripple is just one of the greatest songs of all time, and it's also a marvelous recording. Dave Grisman, the mandolin sounds, the depth on it, it's just beautiful. And he worked on the reissue with me and Pat Milligan at Rhino and David Lemieux from The Dead and blah, 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 a whole bunch of names. But we brought him in, be sure to have his original intent. And it came out sounding really, really well. I don't happen to have it right here, but Michael and I, well, I can find it. Michael and I were talking about this, and I got a test pressing. Blaster sent me a test pressing that Chris Bellman did of the files. I gotta tell you, it's pretty close. It's pretty close. They're really, really close. Bellman's good, obviously. That's a very, very highly calibrated system, mature technology. It's not the file. It just isn't. It's not the file. It's not what Dave did. It's not what Barnhart approved. We talked about this downstairs. You know, there have been reissues and reissues and reissues all over the place on this. But, you know, again, I believe the subjective, the objective, the controversies, the politics, the blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, it's a marital argument. How does it sound? Does it feel good? Does it sound good? Great. Does it move you? Yeah, that's what matters to me.
Hey, Jamie.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've got the example handy, but do you want to talk about, you've talked a lot about, speed stability, but like mixing in sections and pitch differences at those edits.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Good to see you. Glad you came. Yeah, let me see it real fast. I think I only have, it's subtle, but you can see where there's an edit, and Ricky don't lose that number if I can get my hands on it real quick. Does anybody else have any other questions while we're at it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
oh, sorry, on a recording, is there any way that, do they identify that whether a remastering used Plangent or not, or?
Yeah, most of the time there is. We're trying to, it's again, it's an ask that has to have
Yeah.
the beat ball, the logo on the disc. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. There's a famous case of one that was done by Mobile Fidelity where we were on a series of Dire Straits pieces, and they didn't want to talk about that, and that was not credited famously, and it came out later why. But
They had bigger problems than that, I
right,
think.
but you know what? I got interviewed on that. I got beat up pretty hard on something that I said that I still believe is true. The guy from the Washington Post calls up because that whole controversy was so much fun. I mean, for for an arts and leisure writer, that was just like, it was like crack, right? And so he calls up, and my position on that still is, they were doing a very, very good thing for their customers. That is a really good way. I mean, DSD, 256 DSD, good luck hearing it.
Yeah.
Good luck. I mean, and what you can then do in terms of taking these older tapes, many of which I just worked on the Gets Gilberto stuff with Avi that may come out. We're hoping it comes out on CD and the SACD in a couple of months. But there's a lot of dropouts in that, a lot of mess in that, and that can only again be done the way they did. So my opinion was they were doing what they should do for their customers. I just wish they'd been more upfront about it. And it personally bit me because Love Over Gold, which Michael and Al, he reviewed it. It was one of the first digital things. He didn't know it was digital. That's not what the criticism. It just happened to sneak out that way because they weren't upfront about it. It sounds great. It sounds really, really good. I know that it's Neil Dorsman. I know the machine. I know that tape machine. That's a Power Station half-inch Studer. We've seen that machine at least a dozen times on the Springsteen stuff and other things. So there's again one of my, 71 years old. I hope this shit gets resolved at some point because it's really not fair to the material. It's not fair to the original. It's not fair to all of us who are having these specious arguments that really, I think, diminuendo down to just de minimis that have nothing whatsoever to do with what's the music. And if we can make a contribution in the domain that that's the only way that's possible, that's what we want to do. So I'll find that for you and show it to you. I don't think I can get it right now. Any other questions?
Yes, could we extend the upper limit instead of stopping at 20,000? Just open up everything until the dogs start.
Well, we sample at 384, which means that we're flat to 192 kilohertz. The Mytex are flat. The mergings are not. There are other converters, popular converters out there that actually have a trick filter in them to do something. I don't know what, but they have a lot of roll-off in them. But no, anything that you get from us, our tape transport is, the bottom of the head is 10 hertz. The bottom of the preamp is 2 hertz. The top of the system, the head and the preamp is 300 kilohertz. Nobody else is nuts enough to try to build something that's low noise at 240 kilohertz, because it has to be, because this signal that I'm telling you about is about minus 70, minus 75. It's way down in the mud. But we can be quiet, and John Chester and David Smith they're really good guys. I couldn't begin to design this myself, but it's fabulous. Point is to answer your question, yeah, we do go from DC to light. That's the old saying goes.
Does it make any difference?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does, because I think the farther out you push the filter, the better off you're going to be.
Right.
I really do.
Why don't we though?
Again, controversy, MQA problems, different. Yeah, I know. Well, here's the thing about MQA. I'm going to just riff on this for just half a second. One of the things that makes these sound good is not only we do a lot of other stuff besides just the wound flutter correction. There's a lot of phase shift in, like, the NAB curve. The NAB, which is the preemphasis, de-emphasis, you don't know, but the NAB curve is not complementary. There's a different record EQ and a different playback EQ, which means that the phase is going to torque, it's going to twist. 30 is not so bad. 30 doesn't have the bass you wish it had, okay? But it's pretty flat, phase-wise. But a lot of stuff, we're looking at it and we're like, all right, well, maybe with DSP, with some fancy equalizers that'll go from minimum phase to linear phase and back again, back and forth over the course of the spectrum. We can compensate, we can phase lead a little bit in the bass, which is what it takes. And we can do the dip that's at 2K, where the NAB goes cuckoo for a second and then comes back to flat, all right, phase-wise. I'm not talking about amplitude. What we were shocked to find out was that things that measured flat amplitude, absolutely dead-ass flat amplitude by 1/10 of a dB, you change the phase response of it per frequency and it changes dramatically. This is why arguing about Lundahl transformers versus this transformer versus the other thing. That's what it's going to turn out to be. It's going to turn out at the end of the day to be phase shift. So why MQA? Pete Craven is a good designer, great filter designer. We were chasing his stuff in 2002 when he first was putting out Tony Faulkner and some of those English Stewart way back then. And what happened with the NAB curve was like we were playing with it. We kept noticing that it was always a lead in the bass and a lag in the treble. One day my guy made a mistake and he processed the thing twice in a row. So it had double. In fact, it went around 360 degrees in the bass, which at 30 hertz was, you know, I mean, with 360 degrees would be, 3 milliseconds, right? No, 30 milliseconds. 30 milliseconds. And it sounded like, fuck, that's MQA. I think what happened with MQA was that as a result of their filter design and whatnot, they came upon something that sounded cool. First thing I did was I said to John, don't do that. Do what the NAB curve tells you to do. We send out actually a test tone to various people that we know to get an A80 back. They'll send us back 10 feet of tape with that test tone, and we can then make a plug-in that instead of making it sound like an A80, makes it sound less like an A80. Thanks very much. I want to hear the console. All right? So what I think that they did was, and I think there's nothing really other than that just, again, the nebulosity of it being done, which they've been upfront about it. They discovered that in a lot of systems, it just seems as if the bass lead and the treble lag works. And if you do an extreme version of that, I don't think they know yet what they're fixing. I don't think they ever knew what they were fixing. They knew it sounded good. And they convinced George Massenberg and Bob Ludwig and Frank Filippetti and a lot of other guys that I know that it did sound better, and it did. I was there at the first demonstration that JBL did of the M series speakers, which is the first time that Mikhail showed up with a mic tech that had MQA in it. And it sounded good. That phase twist is doing something that's very, very nice. You know what it's doing? You know what it's doing. It takes the woofer at least 3 hertz to be able to get out off the dime. Even if you've got a time-aligned system, yes, time-aligned once it's gotten started, but from a transient response, no. The bass is always going to be slightly lagging. So you lead that digitally, came back into it, and people like it. That's how good we are, by the way, at micro-timing in our hearing. I was talking to my buddy Boyan here, works for Thrax. And Thrax is a great company in Bulgaria that makes a whole lot of high-end gear that unfortunately I don't think is well enough reviewed over here because this stuff sounds good, and they also moonlight manufacturing for some other companies that do good stuff. But I was talking to their chief designer, and you would ascertain this too. Oh yeah, the woofer's always late. Okay, the woofer's always late. So lead the bass a little bit, sounds better. We don't get into that. Nothing in here, again, a priori. These came from test tapes that were sent to people that own 350s or owned M23s. Bruce Botnick has, a bunch of old machines, M79 3Ms, and we get the sample back, and if we know that's the machine that it was recorded on, which is quite often visible because the bias is going to tell you. The bias frequencies are signatures to the machine. So we will, in some cases, apply that overlay to try to negate the Lundahl transformer and the craziness in the equalization circuit and the fact that it's, so we not only get the time-based correction in the wow and flutter domain, but we also get it in the phase domain. So that's actually helping some too. And you guys, again, with these incredibly well-paid line speakers, I think that's the future. I think that's what you're gonna see. Anything else?
Question?
Yes, sir.
I've had a recurring experience where I'm walking and I hear music around the corner.
Yeah.
And that's a live band around the corner.
Yeah.
I can't see anything, but I can hear, I know that's a live band. I've read speculation that, one of the key differentiations between what we recognize as live sound and recording sound is might be compression. I'm curious about your thoughts about what makes live sound.
Okay, I will say also that again, not to be snobbing out, but I come from Pro Audio. I walk by the Linkwitz room and I run inside. I walk by Alberto Guerra's, there's a Hypex guy here that does gallium arsenide. A guy on nitride transistors. I'm walking past his room and I'm like, what? And it's Ocean Waves, these Ocean Way monitors. Okay, so I'm like, all right, I know exactly what you're saying, because you can do that here. You can go, wow, that's right. Nah, it's not so great. It's not right. Whoa. I think it has an awful lot to do, again, with flat frequency response is really, really important. If something's loud, it's going to be a little bit compressed. Your ears compress a lot faster than anybody realizes. You can start compressing at about 78 dB, and it starts to become it's really soft. It's a nice soft clip. It's not going to, because there's a muscle in there that's constantly adjusting its tension to make sure not only that you can hear things at 20 dB in a quiet environment, but also something comes along a little bit hotter. And it's about 1.5 to 1 ratio, and it kicks in pretty low. All right? Mm-hmm. So I think compression sounds louder to us because we have a heuristic internal mechanism that tells us somehow when things are louder. Okay? I think one of the reasons that a lot of the older audio engineers tended to be a little bit too addicted to compression and limiting, although you always had to have some. You could never, you build a beautiful full dynamic range recording and the vacuum cleaner's on in the room next door and the truck goes by, you're not going to hear anything. Okay, so the idea of squishing it somewhat, I mean, Deutsche Grammophon did a great job with that with parallel compression way back when, so that it never fell below a particular floor. If that's done in a really, really smart and listening manner and understanding the tech of it, you can make something that seems to be full range and it isn't. Give you another example of that. Third World Man, which I should have probably played, but that's a gaucho just came out. There's a couple of, again, the Steely Dan catalog's being redone by one of the big names. And I sent, there happened to be a birdie on that, on Third World Man. It's from the previous album. That's the one that got erased where they replaced it with one from Royal Scam. And that machine, all right, there it is. That's right in the digital file, there it is. So I managed to get the D-Wow and D-Flutter done on that. And I sent it to Bob Ludwig, who's a good friend. And he's like, what the hell did they do to my record? All right? I'm fine, that's great, He didn't do it. Somebody else did it. Somebody else put up the bucks to do it, But it's one of Bob's great moments. So anyway, he sends me a test pressing, his test pressing of the original Gaucho, a rip of it. And because it's Bob fucking Ludwig, there's a test tape, the CBS test records at the beginning of it, and it's within less than a tenth of a dB. And I'm listening to Third World Man, it gets the end of it, and it gets this big build at the end, and it builds, and now that's got to be against the end stop. It has to be. That's got to be the loudest thing on the record. And then it does it again. And Carlton's in there. Well, Bob Ludwig managed to find another 2 dB that was nowhere to be found on that record. And probably by cleverly pulling it back a little bit here or there or whatever, but when he hit the end stop, that was the end stop. And there's a tiny, tiny bit of peak limiting on it. Another example of that, just to go to your question, I was walking by Wilson Kronos. I've not always been a fan of Wilson. We put him in Sony Legacy Studios a long, long time ago. Put him in Watson Putney's. I don't know. I never was not nuts about him. But I happened to be at AXPONA, I guess 3 years ago, and the Kronos just came out, and I was like, oh, whoa, I could make a record on this. I think I could master on this. Buddy of mine, Vance Powell, who, by the way, is on the air tonight on Saturday Night Live with Stapleton, great, one of the best young engineers in the world. And I asked the guy at the Wilson booth to put on, Whiskey and You, which is a very, very beautiful, passionate performance, acoustic guitar and voice only, and I've since heard it around the shows occasionally. And there is some compression on it. At the moment that he really gets the most emotionally bent out of shape in the record, there's a tiny bit of limiting because they ran out of end stop. But boy, the way that Vance disguised that so that it does have a little bit of punch to it, it does hit you in the chest a little bit, and it's maxed out, which makes you think that it's louder than it actually is. So that's a long answer to your question, but I think when you're walking down the hall and you hear something that has like a dynamic integrity to it, has phase integrity to it, you're probably going to be attracted to it, and you'll run right inside and say, yeah, because our ears are so much better than this shit. It's incredible. This is a piece of, no disrespect, it's a piece of flapping cardboard, for God's sake. It's supposed to be a cello and a violin and everything else under the sun. It ain't. We make up an awful lot of the gap in between what is, again, the attention, the effect. And it converges, and it's converging, and all guys like me and other people in the business are working their asses off to try to get it to converge with reality. You know, it still isn't. It's still an interpretation. But I tell you what, if I'm walking down the hall and I hear something that's more realistic than I've normally heard before, I'm going to run right into the room. The thing that's interesting now, one more point on this, I go around now and I heard a bunch of different speakers in the last couple of days as I walk by the rooms. They've converged. They converged a little bit. You know this, for example? Some years ago, and I've told this story 1,000 times, some years ago I went around the AES to the speaker manufacturers and I just did this, I know all these guys. What the hell is he doing? I went around the next day and I said, all I can hear is polypropylene. Right? No matter how you voice it, what you do with the crossovers, anything else, all I hear is polypropylene. Well, now, since I think one of the first speakers that actually did this that I knew of anyway was Floyd Toole's Intermezzo, which was well regarded by Harry Pearson of all people, and it was a Harman design. It was the Skunk Works that Floyd Toole and those guys did. It's a very, 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 very fast tweeter. It rings at 35 kilohertz. You can't see it, you can't find it because it's out of band. Whatever ringing is in there is out of band. You can't find it, and that's where that I know what this is. You know what this is? By the waterfall plot. And the waterfall plot of the ringing tweeter or the ringing microphone or ringing anything that has a waterfall plot to it, you're going to know what the material is. And when that is pushed out of band, as it is by some of these brilliant tweeters, Vocal and those guys came along after, you can't hear it. So that's another thing that I think has a lot to do with the verisimilitude, is that there's another axis of how we can find things. We find what the material is by that motion, by that ring out. And so as that's got moved out of the speakers over the last 10, 12 years, we're working on something that I think is going to be a little bit trickier, but on that Sinatra record, it probably would have worked. They used U47s everywhere on that record. That's all the way throughout. That's what they had. In the Sinatra U47, you can see the capitals in the whole case. That has a ring to it. A good digital system, I'm going to end with this, a good digital treatment of that should be able to de-ring that. Should be able to de-ring it. You should be able to walk up to a microphone and click it with little froggy clickers. You remember the little froggy clickers we had when we were kids? It's good enough to do it. And you can see what the waterfall plot is, and you can time the waterfall plot, and you can build a convolution filter that will pull that out. Let's see what that does. See what that sounds like.
How could the audiophile side support the work of cleaning up the process from the tape to the digital file?
Well,
Is
gentlemen like this guy who's just finally got tired of hearing this shit and walking out. Frank, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. That's great.
Right.
Well, there's your answer. Okay, is when those who, thank you, those who are in the industry that write about it, that talk about it, other people hear it. I have only started coming to these shows and doing these kind of chalk talks since a little while back. The thing is, I got a product, I fly the product, but I've learned so much in making this.
Yeah.
I learned so much in making this. It's off book, if you will, off prescription. And it's applicable to, and again, what can help is, maybe tamp down some of the dichotomy, all this fucking dialectics every 2 seconds about is it subjective, is it this, is that. But I don't know, can't single-handedly do that. That's part of it's part of the rhetoric that's in it. what you can do is, I don't know, talk it up. It's anything else. I'm going around saying Linkwitz is a
Yeah.
freaking great speaker. You guys heard some things, this Plangent Processes is the name of it. Look for it, hop on the site wherever. If you do like it, I'm not trying to push you into anything, but you answer the question.
Yeah.
The hardest thing for me is to get Bernie Grumman to actually adopt this stuff. You know what? When Bruce Vodnick walks in with the Doors thing and it's digital because it came from us, because that's how Bruce works these days, and he likes working with us, and he hired me, and he missed the first 2 albums. I stood in front of him like down in the face, but from Waiting on the Sun all the way through, and he goes into Grumman, and then Grumman cuts it off to digital. So I talked to Grumman in any other circumstance, it's like, oh, it has to be from tape.
Yeah.
Do you think the MoFi controversy, for want of a better word, will help? It should, because now everyone knows it's digital and they've been enjoying it before they knew it was.
You know, people hate being wrong.
But like you say, does it sound good?
Yeah.
And does
Yeah.
it go back to the intent?
And does it go back
What
to,
did it
now,
sound like?
here's where Chad and I had a few differences, and, you know, not that anything really particularly contentious, but, Michael doesn't really love the MoFi mastering. I mean, one of the reasons I was talking to him also about that Ricky Douglas is a lump at 260 there that shouldn't be there. I don't know. It's a mastering choice. That's a different thing, okay? So he's not nuts about the way MoFi does that. So he says, you know, well, I didn't know it was digital, but I never liked the way it sounded anyway. And now he'll say it the other way around. He says, I like the way it sounded, and the fact that it was digital doesn't really matter. Huh, it's interesting to hear that out of Joe Analog, right? So I think it might have started something. It's like that butterfly wing cliche.
Yeah.
I was sorry to humble brag, but I was the last line in that article in the Washington Post and the Boston Globe. And what I said exactly this, is they were doing the best that they could for their customers. It's a great sounding product. They worked very hard on it. That's a good technique. I wish to Christ they'd been in front of it.
Well, I've
because
specifically
that
sought
would've-
out a lot of
Right, and that
Plangent
also would
material.
have helped my case that I'm trying to make, that, you know what, digital's gotten awfully good in the last 15 years. And the still the dichotomy between AAA, all right, great, you want to play on your turntable, and you want those artifacts. I mean, if that's what warms your heart, do it, okay? But what that last line was about, they were trying to do the best they could for their customer, and they had the fit to do it.
Mhm.
That's not just on them,
Mhm.
that's on us. So I don't really know the direct answer to that question, other than that I'm out there like, let's see how good we can make this.
Well, I've specifically rebought stuff. I had The Dead before I knew it was. The beauty sounds amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
But I went back through and got the Springsteen reissues because of that.
Yeah, good. Hey, we sold 2.
On CD.
Thank you. No, there's those, and that's again, to touch on the thing with the third parties, you know, these days, like Mobile Fidelity or Acoustic Sounds or whatever. Most of my stuff is major label. You know, lucky for me, you know, that's the route that I took. That's where I came out of. That's the guys that I knew, and I see the original master, and we cry if it's not right. It's not right. I mean, there's all the labels. That. I don't give a shit. No.
The Phil Collins, is that available?
The Phil Collins is not available.
I heard Phil had some issues with the current reissue campaign.
Yeah, I wish they'd gotten in touch with me. That's as I say, that's the hardest part of it. You know, a guy I met at AES a couple of years back, he's like, I'm gonna go see Jimmy Page next week. And I'm like, oh, really? You're gonna go talk to Jimmy Page? Here's the thumb drive. Didn't make it. You know,
So is this about money or is this about politics?
politics. The money is there. The money is always there. This, one of the dead things, we needed to go, there was let me see how much I can condense this. There were a bunch of Grateful Dead concerts that were lost in a ridiculous argument over a storage unit that nobody was paying for way back when, you know, blah, blah. So these came back out. We looked at them, we're like, oh, somebody's touched them between the time then and now, and they have some mold on them. They were poorly stored. And it would have cost probably $500 per tape to get the mold off of them. Now, there's 70 shows, is, 4 reels per show, that's 280 times 500, so you're starting to talk about some money. Money that you gotta ask the boss for. And the Dead guys were a little nervous about this, and I kind of snuck off the side and talked to the A&R girl, Yvette Ramos, and she said, I don't think they always know enough to ask us, because the money will be there if it's for a useful thing. The money where money crosses over into politics, and this happened in the reissue seminar just recently too. We did an Errol Garner show called Concert by the Sea. It was the famous Carmel concert, the first million-selling record in jazz for CBS, for Columbia. It was not Miles Davis, was not even Dave Brubeck. It was Concert by the Sea. And we did we got hold of the people that, Steve Rosenthal actually got hold of the people that are the rights management now because of the estate, blah, blah, blah. We wanted to do it, and we wanted to be able to spend the kind of money on it and make the kind of money on it that the front-loaded kind of production should be. And the guy at Sony said, we're going to sell 3,000 units. Well, there's no money in 3,000 units. At possibly $8, $10 net per piece. No, there's no money to produce it. And did it anyway. It sold 18,000 in the first week. There was a Terry Gross interview. The spike on Amazon was about like 4,000 units just from people in their cars with their phones stuck in traffic. It eventually sold through about 45,000, 50,000 units between the July that it came out and the end of September. That's the last numbers I saw on it. The kid had made a hero of himself by saying, it's only going to sell 3,000 units, boss. Holy shit, look at this, I hit my numbers. That's the problem. That's where the money and the politics of the problem comes in. And it's human nature. That guy wants to keep his job, I understand that. So he'll short the production end in order to make himself look good at not having made a mistake about what his guesstimate was about what he's going to sell.
So what's your system at home?
What's my system at home? Oh, wow.
You don't have to answer to
Oh, no, I'd be happy to. Just don't ask me on a honking form because I won't tell you.
Then you can't post him.
Yeah, exactly. Please post your equipment list. I use a couple of, I use a Belcanto amp is one of them, and lately I've been using Hypexes, which you guys do too. I'm a big advocate of Class D since it's gotten good. I didn't like it before. I was one of the first guys to have that. I had a tact amp, and I remember showing that to guys at Legacy, and they're like, well, we think we would make a different product if we were using this amp. That's a polite way of saying, no, it ain't there yet. So I got a bunch of those. We have like 7 ATRs, ATR 102s, their own custom electronics, of course. And then for most of what I listen to is those Intermezzo 2.6s. I bought like 10 pairs of them. I have spares. Some of that is like a lot of engineers. I'm used to it. I don't want to get thrown in the middle of a project I'd have to take a month off to go to a different speaker, to be honest with you, to learn another speaker. They're set up in 2 very different acoustic environments. One of them's a living room, and it's got a lot of bass, and there's a lot, and the other one's right on my bookshelves, right in front of me, and that sounds really different. The thing that's interesting to me is that I can tell what's on the record wherever it is. It's really crazy. One of the things that I also love, this is a little silent, people talk about listening in the car. Well, back in the old days, if you were listening in a Pontiac or something like that, it had a 6x9-inch Wizard cone. Why did that sound so goddamn good? Why was that so real? Why would you, like if somebody drives by with a 6x9 speaker of Wizard? Well, first of all, there's asymmetries in those dimensions. The modes are all over the place, so they're all kind of broader. The cues aren't as sharp as they would be with a round speaker. But the other is that there's no way for the tweeter to be out of line, timing-wise, with the mid-range or the bass, because they're mechanically coupled. There's a speaker, Boyan works with a company that's out of Mexico that uses a 405A which is a 4-inch Altec Wizard Cone driver, and I remember walking in that room going, oh boy, that's good. It was great from 200 to about 2K. It was unbelievable. Honestly, it was so good because again the time alignment was so strong. So those are things where wherever you're listening, if you're really on the ball, wherever you're listening, you should be able to listen around. When if I walk over there, my frequency response is going to change.
Mm-hmm.
Keith Johnson did this at a show. This was the thing that killed. Keith Johnson is reference recordings. Everybody knows this, and he's the guy that's so much far above the guys at the Audio Engineering Society convention that they hardly ask him to ever come. But he came one year and he did this great thing. We had a room full of engineers, and he played the needle tone, which is a really, it's like square wave, only in very narrow duty cycles. Really sharp, a lot of harmonics. Sounds horrible. All right. Well, he played white noise first. Played white noise, and then he played the needle tone. And then he played white noise again. And the second white noise, everybody's like, wow, what's that? What's that? What's that? That's different white noise. And he's like, no, that's your ears having just immediately adapted the frequency response because of the intervening signal that they heard. That happens really, really, really fast. I had troubles. I should stop at some point pretty soon. But we were doing A/B comparisons a lot, and there was one thing that I was using that was a solo piano that built to an orchestra crescendo with a big cymbal on it, and that one was fooling me because every time I racked back and listened to the beginning of it, the piano was dull. Because over the course of that 8 or 10 seconds, possibly because it wasn't live, possibly because it's an artificial situation, the ear's trying to figure out what to do with it. But just the fact that the frequency response would change because this huge big crescendo and this huge big cymbal roll, now it's cymbal roll and it's blowing me across the room, I go back and listen to the beginning of the sample and it was dull. Because that was what our ears do. So, yeah, I like the speakers I listen to. I like the phase linearity of them. I like the tweeter. I think, again, it was an advanced design for its day, which was 2003 or 2004. It was ahead of its time. I'd use these. I'd use the Kronos. It's what can I make a record on that I can trust that it's not going to be absolutely crazy because my ears adapted to it. One of the famous engineers, Bob Claremont, uses NS10Ms, which is not such a great speaker. But I tell you what, if you get it right on that, and you're accustomed to that, and we walked into someplace a couple of days ago, and the guy's used to listening to something that's a little brighter than I would be. And, he says, yeah, you know why? Because by 5 o'clock at night, I need it to be that bright. Because he works all day long, from 10 in the morning until 5 o'clock at night. He's good enough to know.
So that brings up a question then. So you got an audio engineer.
Right.
He's listening to this all day.
Mm-hmm.
That original intent, how does it change from his ears? Or is he only looking at numbers?
No, he's not looking at numbers. He's listening. Anybody who's any good is listening.
So he knows at 5 o'clock?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Dave Blaster, sure. He's the guy. He knows when he gets up in the morning and listens to it at 10 o'clock in the morning, it's going to be brighter than he finished with it at 10 o'clock the night before. He won't work past 5.
What did he record, though?
What did he record? He did all of the Grateful Dead stuff that we worked on was done by Glasser. He's done all the Smithsonian folkways, a whole bunch of really good stuff. Ludwig's the same way. All those guys, they listen, and they'll say, hey, those guys have got the ears that they can walk into any room, and they could probably get a record out of it.
I think we have
to stop.
Yeah.
stuff for next year.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.